Today we'll be working in my workbook called Esther, and it's on the whole book of Esther. And this is one of the most enjoyable books to study and to teach. We're going to the table of contents right now. We have completed the first six chapters, and basically it started off with the problem. Uh, King Xerxes got horribly, horribly drunk after 6 months and 7 days of banquets, and so he requested Queen Vashti to come to his banquet in her royal throne. I mean, crown, excuse me, throne, and she refuses. She shouldn't be there in the first place, and he shouldn't have asked her. But nobody refuses the king, so they set out a decree that she can no longer be queen and she can no longer be in his presence. So that works for a little while until he realizes he doesn't have a queen. So then they, in chapter two, they have a beauty pageant and they sweep up all the virgins of the provinces, which is 127 provinces, quite a lot of virgins. And in that sweep, Esther is picked up in that sweep. Now, Esther is a Jewish girl and she is being raised by her cousin Mordecai and she is a proper Jewish girl. Um, but then through the beauty pageant, which is detailed and everything like that, and King Xerxes loves her and puts her as queen. And so that's great. So she is queen then, and she is taken away from all her Jewish family, but nobody in the palace knows that she is a Jew and related to Mordecai. So now, chapter three, we get the villain of the story, which is Haman, and Haman was awarded, given highest honors, which makes him higher over any other noble. So when he goes through, they're supposed to bow down to him, but Mordecai, Esther's cousin, does not bow down to Haman. And Haman gets upset and finds out he's a Jew. So instead of doing something against Mordecai, he decides he's going to exterminate all the Jews. And that course caused ruckus in the Jews. 12th of Adar, which is about 11 months away. And so then in chapter four, Mordecai finally gets the answers to Esther, and Esther decides she's going to help her people. So everybody prays or fasts for 3 days, which is praying. And then, so in Esther 5, in chapter 5, she goes in front of the king, and he puts forth his royal scepter, which means that he accepts her to come, and he's excited to see her, and he asks whatever she wants, he will do. And Esther asks for a banquet with the king and Haman. And so King and Haman come to the banquet with Esther, and but instead of presenting her dilemma, she just asks them to come the next day for a banquet. Don't know why she stalled. However, it's very important that she stalled. So that happened. And then we get to chapter six, which is a great and funny story, really. Haman, who sets up a poll to kill Mordecai and is going to come in the morning to ask approval from the king. In that time frame, King Xerxes cannot sleep, so he reads the Chronicles and realizes that Mordecai has done a great service to the king and has not yet been rewarded. He asks Haman in the morning before Haman can say anything, what can be done to a person the pleasure of the king. Haman thinks it's him, so he gives him all these wonderful things to do. And the king goes, "Great, you do that for Mordecai." And so Haman has to lead Mordecai through the streets on the king's horse and all this thing. So it's quite a twist of fate. So now we come to chapter seven. At the end of this chapter, Haman is upset, and then he's invited again to the queen's banquet, which is where we take up chapter seven. Haman accused and sentenced, Esther 7 1 through 10. So the king and Haman went to the Queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted. The king has asked these questions before. Can you name one? First, when she comes in the court and he puts forth the royal scepter, and second, in the first banquet. What was the king willing to give her? Up to half the kingdom. Um, Based on his question to Esther, what is King's feelings about Esther? He really loves her. Where is Mordecai at this point? Probably at the king's gate. He's also praying with his rest of his Jews. How has Haman's inner feelings, unknown to the king and queen, changed from the first banquet with Esther to the second banquet? He's in um, perplexed and a little upset because of all that he's had to do for Mordecai. Then Queen Esther answered, If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. And if we'd merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. If I had found If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. What is Queen Esther's petition? That her life be spared. What is Queen Esther's request? That her people also be spared. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. Queen Esther would not have disturbed the king if they were merely sold as slaves, because they're pretty much slaves now. Why do you think Queen Esther would not have bothered the king if her people were merely sold as slaves? Because they are a captive people, and being sold into slaves is actually what they could expect a lot of times. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, The adversary and the enemy, this vile Haman. Who is the man who has dared to do such a thing? Haman. Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? Sitting right next to the king. Esther uses three negative terms to describe Haman. What are they? Adversary, adversary, an enemy, and vile. Did the king or Haman know Esther was Jewish up to this point? No, they haven't. Esther did not accuse the king, but is the king partially to blame? If not, what not? If so, how? Yes, he's partially to blame because he gave Haman blanket authority to do whatever he wanted, not realizing how important it was. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Where did the king go? Out into the garden, palace garden. Why do you think he went there? Because he's angry and he's trying to figure out what is it he's wanting to do about the situation. What did Haman do? Decided to stay behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Why did Haman beg for his life? Because he could see that the king had already decided his fate. The king is most likely in turmoil about many things. Which of the following could be going through his head? He had honored Haman with a very high honor. Yes. He loves Queen Esther. Yes. He had given over his signet ring to Haman. Yes. The price of tea in China? I certainly doubt that. Camel have two humps? I certainly doubt that. Mordecai, who saved his life and he had just honored, was a Jew. And yes, that may be going through his mind, and he could not revoke the decree of assassination. That's also within his mind. How does he fix the problem? Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, Wouldn't he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. What did the king see as he entered the banquet hall from the palace garden? Haman was fallen on Queen Esther. Was it? What is the most likely reason why Haman was so close and fell on the couch? He was begging for his life. What did the king assume? That he was trying to molest Queen Esther? What would the king assumed help? What would the king assumed help or would the king would what the king assumed help or hinder Haman's plea for his life? It'd certainly hinder it. As soon as the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. This means as soon as the king spoke, the servants covered Haman's face as a condemned man. They knew he was condemned. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching to the height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." We first meet Harbona in Esther 110. What was his job function at that time? 110, that would most likely be escorting the queen, Vashti, to the king. How high is the pole in the scripture? If I recall, 50 cubits. Yeah. What was the pole set up for? To impale Mordecai. What had Mordecai done for the king? He had discovered the plot to assassinate him. The king said, "Impale him on it," that is Haman. So they impaled Haman on the pole that he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. What happens to Haman? He's going to be impaled on the pole. Where was the pole located? Just right outside Haman's house. Who lived at Haman's house? Zeresh and his family. Do you think Zeresh saw the impaling? Oh, absolutely. What would Zeresh be thinking at this point? Her life is in danger. What do you think Mordecai thought when he found out about Haman's impaling? Um, Pretty happy. Everything is great except for one thing. Can a decree made by a king be revoked by a king? No, it can't. So now we come to the end of this chapter. So let's see if we can answer the questions. Enraged, the king went out into the palace garden. Number 3. Number 4, King Xerxes was willing to give up Queen Esther up to half of what? His kingdom. 5, Esther's petition to the king is to grant her her life. Right? Yeah. Who does Esther accuse? Haman. 1 down. Who told the king of the impaling pole? Um, um, Harbona. Harbona. Esther's request is for the king to spare her people. Yeah. That's the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. There is more to come in the book of Esther. Talk to you later.